Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third and final deliberations for the Rochester City School District budget season. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Tonight, we're going to be covering the intro section, the overview, revenues, ARP, capital improvement projects, and district-wide sections, which includes everything else within the budget book that has not been discussed up until this point. In addition, joining us tonight via Zoom, we have Commissioner Powell, Dr. Spence, and Dr. Nelms from East High School that will be joining us if they're not already on the Zoom. And so I will be going around Robin style, same format as the last two budget deliberations. If you have a question related to those sections, if you could please also indicate the page number so that our staff can put it up on the screen so the listening audience at home watching, whether through Facebook or YouTube, can follow along if they choose to. The budget is available online for folks to download, and you can also go through board docs to see some of the topics that we're discussing tonight. And with that, I just want to also just point out before we start that this is actually Commissioner Powell's last budget deliberations, and I will leave her room at the end if she would like to share some words on Zoom. And I just want to put that out there. She's listening. I don't know if she's on just quite yet, but I will bring that back up at the end of tonight to highlight that. So with that said, we can get started with the intro section, and I'll take questions on that. I also want to acknowledge that our parent rep, Deveth Garcia, is here tonight as well, and so I will be looking to her as well to ask any questions that she may have. We're waiting for her translator, who was here, so I'm going to wait till they come back and sit next to you, Deveth, before I call on you, okay? So with that, I will start round robin, and I will start with Commissioner Patterson. Yes. Dejan, his mic, can you hear it? Yeah, there you go.
Test 1, 2. Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'm going to ask that you come back around to me. I ran from another event, and my budget book was left at home that highlighted, and so I'm borrowing a book tonight, and also I forgot to put my contacts in, so it's going to be very difficult for me even to read this, but I'm going to try to recall the sections that I highlighted. If you can come back around to me, I'd appreciate it.
I will do that, Commissioner Patterson, thank you. Commissioner Malloy, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Is my mic on? Okay. Did we need to start in the intro section, or can we, intro section. Okay. I don't have any for the intro section other than to express a concern more than anything that some of the goals that I'm seeing there don't necessarily align with some of the board goals. Some of them seemed pretty new, and it was a surprise to see that. So I think that some work needs to be done on some type of realignment. And that's all I have for the intro section. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. I do want to point out, like, the intro section is like 2 to 3 pages, so if you don't have a question, we'll go through just so that we can go by these sections. But if you don't have a question or a comment, you can just skip that section and say my questions are related to another section, come back to me, and that's fine.
Sure.
Commissioner Simmons, anything on the intro section? Commissioner Adams, anything on intro? Okay, thank you. Commissioner President Elliott, anything on the introduction section?
Yes, the question that I have has basically, has to do with the narrative piece that we've been discussing in terms of where we can find programmatic pieces in the budget. And so a lot of what Dr. Jallo has recommended, are we going to be able to find that information, that narrative? Would that be in this section, the introduction section, or where would that be?
So that is going to be in each of the department sections, where we're going to have updated descriptions, as well as some of the items and understanding of what is in the actual budget that precedes and follows it.
Any changes to the introduction section?
As a whole, no.
Okay. I guess I would have also, and maybe not for this budget season, but to have it in this section so that people can get a general overview of our programs funded for receivership and those kinds of things. What I would have been like to have seen, and if they're in the sections, I guess that's fine, but I think that it would have made it even more robust budget book if we could have had those pieces in some central location so that it's easily found, and even maybe references to the sections that those areas are in. So,
And we just, although the introduction is not going to change, there's going to be some supporting documents in the front of the book when the final book's done that talks a little bit about some of the things that are proceeding in the rest of the book, but not in particular to just that introduction section.
all right, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, President Elliott. Okay, and so I did check in with both Commissioner Patterson and our parent rep, and they have no questions or comments related to the intro section, so we're just going to move on to the next section. And the next section is the overview, and I will do the overview because it's also a very small section with revenue. And so if you have questions related to just the pages that have the overview or revenue section, which is also a very small section, I'll pause there to give my colleagues a moment to go to those sections. For the listening audience, the overview page starts on page 5, and then the revenue section starts on page 18 of the budget book. So I'm actually going to start with my parent rep, who has a question that is related to transportation, but certainly one I think that could align with how revenue is distributed. So, Marisol, ¿tú la puedes ayudar? Because también si necesita, ella puede estar ahí para ayudarte, but you're going to ask, yes.
I need practice, so it's okay. Good evening, everybody. Some parents send me these questions. So we recognize that the district does not transport students who are less than 1.5 miles from their schools. There are many concerns from parents regarding neighborhood safety. What provision is the district providing to ensure the safety of children? Can the district provide transportation in unsafe neighborhoods?
Thank you for that question. A very relevant question and important topic. And I will tell you that this board, as well as myself, went to Albany asking for the 1.5 mile reimbursement to be reduced to 0.5. That didn't happen, unfortunately, but it's something that we'll continue to advocate for. The other part of this is our bus driver capacity and what we're able to do. You know, we're struggling to fill vacancies and fill bus driving positions, but wherever we can, I know that the transportation team and Chief Operations Officer Schmidt has done whatever possible to accommodate areas when we can, right? You know, and I wish I could make a promise that I could do that across the board. I just can't yet because of our capacity with bus drivers and our ability to get bus drivers to fill all of our needs and all of our routes. But it is something that this board and you know myself has said on numerous occasions, if we can get the reimbursement drop, that will absolutely help as well.
It's the concern of many parents.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Debeth. Commissioner Patterson, any questions related to, well, first let me ask, are you ready? I know you, do you have any questions related to the overview or revenue section?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. On page 5, I see that there's an increase in the school food service fund of about 13%. I'm just trying to understand that 13% in a bit more detail. I know that in terms of our school food service, there's been a lot of advocacy at the state and national levels by our representatives, including Congressman Morelli, Senators Cooney and Brooke, as well as our Assembly members Meeks, Clark, and Bronson. I think many board members have also pursued better food options for our students. We've toured our different various kitchens, our central kitchen, and I think we've all been advocating to see better food available for our students and healthier options and more culturally relevant options. Is that reflected in this budget?
So I do want to start is I recognize last year the board's commitment to increasing funding in food service, right? And we did honor that and make sure that that was in this budget as well. We are seeing an increase in federal aid on food, and we're also seeing, because of the quality of food that food service has been delivering, we're also seeing a pretty significant increase in the number of students eating meals. So those are also driving some of these expenses up, but I'll ask that Chief Schmidt add anything else that I may have missed.
Good evening, everyone. President Elliott, Vice President Brown, Commissioner Lemoy. I think the only thing I would add is that all of our informal and formal surveys with students, whether by school or district-wide, have all been very positive as well. But I think to Dr. Peluso's point, the meal counts being up, I think that students certainly drive meals with their feet, and I think that's really what we're seeing, much more of a benefit in that area. Really due to all of your commitment last year. I think you set the bar very high, and I think we've done a really good job in terms of reaching that bar.
Perfect. I just wanted to ensure that we continue that push as a board and district. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you. Question page 5, I'm looking at the major, the budget initiatives, and number 1, increasing ELA and math proficiency in grades 3 through 8. Wanting to know more about what that looks like, because, well, where are the dollars saturating? Is it 3 through 8 that the dollars will be concentrated?
So, the tough part of a line item budget is where you see some of the, you don't see the exact cost. So where you're going to see an increase in 3 through 8 are going to be with our intervention prevention teachers, some of the stuff that you're going to see in grants, TOAs, coaches. Those are really dedicated to strategies that teaching and learning is putting in for 3 through 8. You also have iReady assessment data to help with that. We have other online programs to help with 3 through 8 targeted, but I'll see if Chief Strickland has anything I missed. Deputy Strickland, see him still on.
Great question, Commissioner Simmons. So upon reviewing the budget, you will notice that the majority of the aid funds are really geared towards personnel. However, when you're talking about increasing proficiency in math and English language arts and your subject area courses, you really look for those increases in title funds. And then we have a large chunk of ARP funds through school-based budgets, through my personal budget, through the Chief Academic Officer's budget, which are supposed to yield positive outcomes because we're putting money towards additional initiatives throughout,
Right. And will those funds, wherever they come, title funds or what have you, will those be concentrated in grades 3 through 8?
Absolutely, they have to.
Okay.
So one of the things in title, for instance, that we're funding intervention prevention teachers and instructional coaches. We have to do a lot of reporting around what are they actually doing. For our intervention prevention teachers next year, we have to ensure that they are tied to students.
Okay.
So that is that's a must, or you risk losing those funds.
Right.
And of course, through our iReady and different measuring sticks, we will determine if that's effective or not.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking and focus on if the dollars will be concentrated in grades 3 through 8 is because my thought process is kind of like we talk about our preschool programming. We had an awesome event. It was great to attend, and recognizing that our literacy is starting at that preschool level, right? And then
Yes.
something happens after a child leaves preschool, starting kindergarten through first and second grade, and by the time they get to third grade, like what's happening there? And so that's why I wanted to know if the dollars were being concentrated in the 3 through 8, because it seems like something needs to happen in that K through 2 time space.
So, yeah, so I think, 3 through 8 is how we're measured it on state assessment, right? So you want to see the increase in measures on how we're doing on state assessment. But that doesn't mean that we're not pouring into our K-1-2, right? We're doing letters training, we're doing a lot of initiatives in that K-1-2 level to make sure that we're seeing results in 3 through 8. But that 3 through 8 is really about, that's a metric that is public and out there, and we want to see an increase in 3 through 8. It doesn't mean that we're not pouring into K-1 and 2 as well with professional development, training, and resources.
Okay, so I probably just want to know more about what that looks like eventually. Thank you for that understanding. And then also the dollars around chronic absenteeism. Just wondering what that might look like beyond like an attendance splits or something of that nature. What else are we looking at?
And then I could turn it over to Deputy Turner, but you'll see some of those funds, especially in your ARP. And when you go through the ARPs in schools, you'll start to see some of it is around incentives, some of it's around, we were at a school visit today, right, that are doing things to kind of incentivize attendance outside of just the home visits and the parent liaisons and the homeschool assistants that work on attendance. Other initiatives that are happening throughout the buildings are also in there.
Okay, thank you. And then 2 last questions. Thank you for your patience with me. On page 18, revenue summary, just somebody help me understand. It's probably somewhere and I missed it, but the excess cost aid, what is that?
I'm going to turn that one over to.
Yes, excess cost aid is that can you guys hear me? No?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep, okay. That's an aid that school districts receive for specific students that with special education students that go above a certain dollar threshold that can directly be tied to that student. And when that threshold is reached, that floor, we start getting excess cost aid on a percentage above that floor. So for instance, when a student costs X amount of dollars, you subtract the floor off of that, and then we generate additional aid to help offset the high cost of that student.
Right, okay, thank you. And then my final question for this is around the, on page 19, early college cohort 4. I see some dollars allocated there, just curious what that is.
I just want to find it here. I'm assuming it is a grant fund that is the next section of the grant.
It's on page 19.
19.
Yeah.
Yep, it's the grant allocation.
Oh. Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to acknowledge and see if Commissioner Powell has any questions related to this section. Oh, she has not yet presently arrived on Zoom, so I apologize. President Elliott, any questions related to sections overview and revenues, those 2 sections?
Yes, so on page 5, we talk about moving the district closer to, is it on? Closer to true fiscal stability. So, Dr. Bluso, can you describe for us what it will look like when we have true fiscal stability?
I think we would be organized in a way that supports students to the maximum ability, right, with the resources that we have allowed, where we're not relying on, and this budget doesn't, but we're not relying on fund balance to provide cost for services, staff, operations, buildings, that we're in a way that we're organized to provide our students high-quality instruction, by highly certified teachers and high-quality facilities, right? You know, and that is how we have a true fiscal stable environment where we know what our revenue is coming around, that we hopefully stabilize our enrollment so that we don't continue to see a decline, because as you decline enrollment, you're going to see decline in revenue, and then that's going to have us become, leaner or reduce our footprint and resources. So for me, fiscal stability is making sure that we're working within the means of the money that we're receiving to give our students the best potential and possible opportunities they could have instructionally.
Somewhere we probably need to put that statement, somewhere, true fiscal stability, what that really means.
Yep.
And then, the question around, and this is, this is probably gonna be tough, but the liability insurance for cybersecurity. I mean, that is gonna be going out of the roof, so, I know somebody can actually comment on that, but that, it seems that that's going to be something that we just don't have our, can have our arms around, because it's just, some of the costs, just for small agencies are exorbitant, so what does that mean for us?
Yeah, I'm going to let Glenn take that question, but I do think beyond just cybersecurity, we're seeing that in a bunch of different areas in terms of what our liability may be and what the cost is. But
I'm sorry, could you just group that question together? I heard cybersecurity and I bounced right up.
Right.
Good evening, President Elliott, Vice President Legrand, Commissioners.
that was an excellent response time, by the way, from there to here. That's good.
So, is it, yes, so, do I need to be close to it? Yes, please. So, cybersecurity insurance is going through the roof, and we just don't have any, in small organizations, nonprofits, for example, we're having difficulty in trying to find some reasonable insurance to cover cybersecurity. What's your anticipation or forecast around cybersecurity, and how do are we somewhat certain that at this point in time, we have sufficient funding allocated for cybersecurity insurance?
So what we've done with cybersecurity, we've been working with the legal department. And our Auditor General. We've entertained one offer from a cybersecurity binder. We have just today received a second offer, which as a K-12 organization is quite a compliment to what our cybersecurity team is doing down in the basement. The far majority of districts across the country aren't even being offered binders. And what's happening now and what we're seeing across the country with the Council of Great City Schools is that cyber insurance companies took such a great hit through being hit or being attacked and being compromised that the premiums have gone up so much that in many instances the insurance companies are just looking to get back what it is that they've lost during that time when institutions were compromised. Many insurance companies are trying to get out of the business right now, but to answer part two of that question, what are we doing? We're taking a lot of those funds and investing, and I did a written response back to Commissioner Malloy, and I believe the whole board received the response because I just didn't want to make it public as to exactly what we're doing to protect our environments. But we're reinvesting those monies into greater protection, using Microsoft tools and other artificial intelligence tools to protect our environments. But once again, the fact that we've been recognized as somebody who is insurable is quite a compliment to what's taken place here.
Okay, so for the time being, in terms of what may be budgeted for, you feel that it is sufficient, and you're also saying that we have our own team that's doing that work as well. And I'm wondering if we're going to be getting a good deal since a lot of the insurance companies are trying to just catch up to where they were pre-pandemic.
I'll let General Counsel also speak to this, but there are no good deals out there. It's right on the razor's edge between whether it's dollar friendly or not, or prohibitive against us. General Counsel, I don't know if you want to add to that from our last meeting that we had.
for it. Really, as Glenn said, we've been exploring, all options. I am not going to, I'm going to be a little light on specifics because as it's important that, as you said, we can't tell everyone exactly what we're doing because we're talking a security issue. But we do have a broker that is constantly engaged with the market to bring us offers. As he said, the fact that we do have some potential offers out there is a recognition of how good our internal team is. It is very expensive. Whether it is prohibitively expensive is a decision that will be made pretty soon. But we're still in the evaluation phase right now.
I will say that I'll be giving a full report to the Board of Education on July 27th on cybersecurity, and that's going to be an annual report to the board that we'll schedule annually, something that just hasn't taken place in the past.
That would be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to point out, Glenn, if you're not familiar, that our board question log and the answers we do make public. So if there is anything in your response that you don't want public to not put us at risk, I would just ask that we make sure we redact anything that could potentially put us out there by exposure, and just modify it, and then we can have the question answer in greater detail in an executive, because we don't want to put ourselves out there with not, so I just want to put that out there in case. Commissioner Adams has a question, and then, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, President Elliott, sorry.
So I thought I saw a email, a Facebook post from Senator Lunsford, Assemblywoman Lunsford, that I interpreted as meaning that they've come to a deal in the budget process. So can you talk a little bit about what that means for our revenue?
So we received the overall budget today, right? And there has been some changes. There's been some adds in areas like our health fund, some other reimbursements. But our foundation aid did drop a little bit from what was anticipated. It was like I think a $1.2 million overall drop. So in the whole scheme of the budget, we ended up being flat with some other adds and some things. There's no large hits on either side that puts us for not being stable in terms of what is currently proposed. But if there's anything that Sean wants to add, he can.
Okay. The reduction that we had in foundation aid is reflective of our enrollment is declining. So the decline in this year, as we tracked it through, the foundation aid is paid on enrollment, so our actual bed stay enrollment. So we'll see that in future years as well, as my expectation as enrollment declines. Okay. As enrollment declines, we'll see a drop in our foundation aid.
Thank you, President Elliott. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I see on here there's like a $11 million drop in transportation aid. Is that going to affect our service? You know, because like I can still clearly recall us having a serious transportation issue, and so I see it's like $11 million here with less. Are we still going to have the quality of service? How is that going to affect us? That's my question.
So I want to go to before transportation aid, and what we've lost in aid came from some contracts that we didn't get reimbursement.
Thank you for the question. Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, thank you. I had a couple more questions I had forgotten. They were regarding this section. On page 7, I see that anticipated charter school enrollment, there's an increase. With Urban Choice Charter School, where they're losing, well, 400 students, now are finding new schools. And so how does this get reflected in our budget? Do we see an increase or an influx of students now? I think it's really convenient, too, that we find out about the closure after our school of choice process has been completed. So that makes well, the lottery process, it complicates the desirability, I would say, of some of our schools. But do we anticipate a change in this? And to add to that question, in terms of charter schools, under our prior administration, we had an admin position created to manage charter school enrollments and all the other bureaucratic BS related to these double drains of faux public institutions. So is this also still reflected in our budget under our current administration? Thanks.
So, yep, very good questions. I will say to start with the close of the charter schools, we have reached out and sent letters to each of those families. We would love to have conversations with them, tell them the programs that we have here in the district, tell them that we have seats available here from the district, and we gave them a direct line, direct emails, so that we could handle them one-on-one to make sure that their kids are appropriately placed in the school that we have here. So we welcome them back, and we encourage them to contact us. We would love to receive them back here in the district. That being said, the other cost of this is some grade levels are changing. Some schools are taking more students. So that is where it comes in our projection of where we increased the 7,800 to 7,800 seats is what we anticipated for next year. So those are where those adds come in. As for the charter school position was one that was added into the budget, and I think in response to something that was outlined in the financial and academic plan. And I think after some conversations around that, the intent of the position is to make sure that we're accurately reflecting and monitoring costs in, cost out, people in, people out. It wasn't I think at one point it was being billed as or explained as a charter school position, as, the liaisons to help families with charter schools. This really is to kind of manage our charter schools here and what comes in, because there's 7,800 students, a lot of students, right, and a lot of money. And there needs to be some control mechanisms in place there, because we need to make sure people are getting on their charter schools the appropriate amount of money, and that we're not overpaying or not, we're getting the right money that needs to go out. So that is that with that position said. Internally, we have people that do that work. And so that's the conversation that we've had with Dr. Jowell to kind of say, could we modify this so that it doesn't read as a charter school quote-unquote position, but someone internally that does that work? Because that is important work that we need to make sure that we do, because if we don't do that right, it could cost us millions of dollars in paying overages in charter schools.
Yeah, my concern, I think, is too with anticipated school closures and some major budget decisions moving forward. We want to make sure that we're creating an environment here to support our own students, and we want to make sure that that's happening directly in the classrooms, so we have the biggest impact on student outcomes. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. President Elliott?
Well, I thought I had a question, then I was thinking that maybe I should not ask the question, but in line with what Commissioner Malloy is arguing about the Urban Choice School in terms of, how do we invite students back into the district. But then I thought about, well, they've got teachers over there, but then I thought, well, maybe we don't want the teachers because the school closed. I'm not sure, so I'll just put it up there that
We would encourage any teacher at Urban Choice that would like to apply to the district to contact our Human Resource Department. We will reach out to them personally as well to make sure that, they have a place. We obviously are always looking for highly qualified, highly certified teachers.
but the school closed. So, but I'll leave it alone.
Thank you, President Elliott. I am going to call on my parent rep, who I know has another question, and this is kind of an overview, so this would be the time to ask.
A bilingual Educational Council pattern representative wonders if the district fully funding and staffing bilingual honors at middle school.
Bilingual. I'm going to ask Deputy Superintendent Strickland. I got it right that time. Yep.
So at this current time, we are not funding a bilingual honors program for various reasons, capacity being one of them. However, after the great presentation that we had today at School 12 and thinking about the continuous conversation around equity, it definitely must be considered. And as soon as I heard some of the content from an earlier presentation, I jotted that down right away, and we'll likely get into action of figuring out how we can make sure that we bring a highly sustainable program for all students.
All right. I don't know if that's my mic. If you can all check your microphones and make sure they're off. I'm going to move on to the next section. I was just looking, is Commissioner Powell on yet? Okay, Commissioner Powell, before I move on to the next sections, we were covering sections overview and revenues at this time. I didn't know if you had any questions before I move on to the next section.
No, thank you for asking.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Okay, the next section is going to be district-wide ARP, and then I am going to add the CIP, so if folks have any questions related to that, we'll cover those three sections at this time. And so I'll round robin, and Commissioner Patterson, I'm going to start with you. You look like you have some questions related to one of those three sections.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm trying to review while you guys are speaking, and I did miss one in revenue.
Commissioner Patterson, go ahead.
Referencing page 20, under total school food service fund revenue, it's under that block there, Roman numeral number 7, talks about student health and safety, reopening and COVID response. In the estimated 2023 to 2024, there is roughly 42.6 that's being expended there. Could you explain that a little bit better for me?
So I believe, do you want to take this? So this is some of the funds that are coming back in to general fund from CURSA and ARP that we, especially CURSA, right, that we had coded for COVID-related expenses, so your custodial, some of your paras, some of that stuff. So that comes into, some of those funds are coming back into general fund under this line as well.
Yeah. So in this section, this is actually the ARP tab at the back with the ARP budget for 23-24. This is recapturing or determining some of those funds, how they're prioritized in the actual budget tab. So we kind of took the budget book and we've added additional, try to insert at appropriate spots some summaries of ARP dollars, because otherwise they're not in the actual, the individual budgets detailed are general fund, special aid fund, which is grants and title money. But in this case, we're trying to summarize what you'll see under the ARP tab.
And I apologize, I had cross-referenced in my own binder, but
So-
I don't have that.
If you look at page 210.
And 211, right? Wasn't it 210?
Yeah, and then go, yep, start at 210 and go to 211. you start to see what are those expenses that are outlined in the ARP funding here.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Patterson, were you done?
Well,
Or-
were you finished?
Yeah, so, yep.
Right, I think I had, and again, I'm going just from recollection. I had a question relative to Oracle, and there was a certain amount, I just can't remember, but something relative to Oracle spending in there. I had a question, but again, I can't, I just,
So, yeah,
I'll have to put it in the question log. I just can't
Oracle,
remember.
Oracle on page 211 is probably where you're referencing. There's money set aside for Oracle and ARP to continue the lift of our business transformation, right? We need to go where PeopleSoft is our program, not to get too into the weeds and semantics of this. PeopleSoft is a program that we run for our business system. It is outdated. It's not at the level we need it to be. It's going to be non-existent in a couple of years. So this is our transformation to the new product. So we're using this ARP money to help us transition to this new business system.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. And I'll come back if you have questions related to the 3 sections that I just mentioned, which we're now moving on for the listening audience to ARP. The capital improvement projects, which I reference as CIP, so I want to apologize for using that acronym and not saying capital improvement projects, and the district-wide section. I'm actually going to start with my parent rep, or our parent rep, Diveth. I know she has one more question, and so we'll start there.
The Board of Education mentioned that several schools will be closing. How will the district engage families in the process, and what is the transition plan for the kids and families?
So we are entering a very interesting time with what is going on with FMP, how we're reorganizing schools with our configuration, right? And I think ultimately some of those conversations are going to have to come out with families and have some conversation about what do schools look like. We're going to have to close schools, right? I have to say that out loud. I can't put it any other way, that based on our current enrollment, we're going to have to close buildings. How we do that is going to be based on, what are some of the, what buildings have not gone through facilities modernization programs, because we can't close any schools that have gone through FMP, facilities modernization program, FMP. So there's certain buildings that have not gone through that process, right, that are going to leave us to look at more closely and intensely from it. From there, it is going to be having conversations with our families about, what do we want our schools to look like? What do we want them to sound like? What do we want them to feel like? Because that's going to be the most important thing. And like I said earlier, to me, it's about making sure that every student in this district has a high-quality, high-certified teacher in front of them in the best facilities, right? And our buildings that have gone through FMP are top-notch. The team has done some amazing things with those buildings, so we want to make sure that every kid has that experience. And we'll be engaging families along the way. There's going to be tough times and tough decisions and tough conversations as a community, as a board, collectively, and as our administration team. We don't take closing any building lightly. So it'll be very, very much as transparent and open as we can be, but once again, knowing that inevitably there's going to have to be some building closures when we get down to it.
Thank you, Deveth. Commissioner Malloy?
The first is on page 196 and 197. I'm wondering, the first question is, what percent of our overall budget goes towards our debt service year after year, and what's our overall debt?
I'm going to have Sean take that question.
Thank you.
We've talked about debt services ad nauseum, he and I. So just from my superintendent level understanding, and then we can get to the accountant's understanding, right? There are payment scales and payment schedules on debt services. And those schedules are made when we borrow and take the money. That determines how much we pay when, and that dictates how much comes and goes. So every year may be different based on the payment schedule on those loans and debt services. That's just my simple, hey, this is my mortgage, this is my car loan type of debt service schedule, right? I don't. Right, student, all those other loans in there as well, so.
We're on, okay. Yeah, so I was actually looking for there's on page 8 of the book, we give a summary by object code, and so our debt service, there's kind of a visual there. It is
The orange was not evident, so I couldn't tell which line was.
Oh.
It looks
well,
like a small percentage of our budget, but I wasn't sure
well,
what
no,
was the orange debt service.
Because it's in transfers.
yeah, it's, right,
Partial transfers.
yeah. 9.6% is the number that we're looking for. I actually, if I had our financial statement with me, I could tell you what our total outstanding debt is. But as the superintendent was explaining, so our debt service, we have multiple bond issues outstanding on different payment schedules, and so you'll see fluctuations year to year in the debt service paid. But what caused the debt? The debt is associated with improvements to our facilities, and so the goal is to get as much building aid or aid back from the state based on the improvements we make, and then we use that aid to pay debt service. So you try to match those up as closely as possible.
Will we ever be out of debt?
Probably not, and it's not. As a governmental entity, debt is a tool for long-term facility maintenance. So what you're doing is you're making improvements to your facilities and kind of paying for it over time. So like if we put a new roof on a school, and let's say that roof has a 25-year life, then what you're doing if we borrow money to pay for that, and you match that up, you pay bonds over 25 years for that debt service, then you're matching it up for the life of the improvement to the asset, as opposed to something, our operating budget goes for things that are like consumable or like staffing, like somebody's here, they're working, they get paid, that the service was delivered and they're paid, whereas facilities is this longer term concept. So we'll always have debt. The thing is that you want to make strategic investments with your facilities improvement, and the superintendent was just talking about reconfiguring schools. So we need to be thinking about that. We don't want to put investments into facilities that turn around and 2 years later go offline, right? Because now we have debt. We've improved the building. We have debt for it. But if it's offline, we won't get aid reimbursement from the state. So it's a strategic area unto itself, how you use debt.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for answering that. I know it probably seems like a simplistic sort of question to ask that, but I think it's important for the community to hear and understand. I mean, I need to understand it, but so does the community, and I really liked how you explained that. Really puts things in a different perspective. So thank you for that answer. My second question is related to pages, starting on 196. We see health insurance increases nationwide. And what increase percentage-wise can we expect for our own employee health insurance? I know that self-funding has allowed for competitive rates here in our CSD compared to other school districts. So how do our rates and the increase in our rates compare to county and statewide or with other school districts?
Yeah. So the benefits that we offer are split into various categories, health insurance being a major part of it. We also have a large retirement obligation, which is controlled by the state. The state sets the rates on those. As far as the health insurance goes, we are self-funded, self-insured, and that has allowed us over time to keep our rate increases down, but it is, the reality of the health insurance market is costs are always driving up. And then it's also tied to our experience rating, our own internal experience. So we have 5,800 employees. Not all take the insurance, but over all those employees, then what happens in a year as far as claims and utilization, surgeries, chronic conditions, things that happen to all of us as we get older. And so the claims can vary from year to year. Like you get, it's kind of a layman's term, a bad year. A bad year is where you have a lot of employees who have major health claims, major health issues, and not just employees, but their dependents as well, right? So, and so you get these fluctuations, but being self-funded, we have funds that are kind of accrued that we can kind of smooth that out, right? So we don't want to overreact to a bad year, because you have a bad year, you can have a good year that can follow. So it kind of smooths out. But it's still going to go up, but I think versus the marketplace, our rates that we're looking at our increases, and it goes to being self-funded for an extended period of time here, we'll tamp that down a little bit and keep it realistic versus the marketplace. If we were fully insured, right, you go out and insurance company provides insurance for you, they have to take the risk there, and they have to price it up so that they don't get caught short, right? So if you're fully insured, you're kind of in a position where you're going to usually pay more, right? And then the excess they keep, right? So self-funded is very beneficial.
Yeah, and I think the reason I ask this question is that as we anticipate potential school closures and potential layoffs in the future, will that affect our self-funding options or drive up costs
So I'm going to have
down the road? And do we need to prepare for that?
Chief Miller chime in here as well.
Commissioner Malloy, if I could add that most organizations, self-insured, can expect to see a 4 to 6% increase in healthcare costs most recently. Ours is at about 2 1/3, which is really good.
Yeah, it seems really good.
Yeah, so we've done some things to really pull on some levers to manage and try to reduce costs. Healthy Rewards was one of those things that we did to try to reduce some of the costs. We have other things ongoing, like the dependent audit that we're engaged in right now, that we're working through, and that's revealing, that we have some people that should come off our health care, which again is a nice savings. We're at about 100 people right now, and we anticipate some more. That's typical. We have 11,000 belly buttons on our health insurance plan. We would anticipate with a dependent audit that we would see at least 1% of those likely coming off. So that's one of the things we're doing. And we have a whole other series of things that we do. Monthly we meet in partnership with our labor unions, and we work with our healthcare broker to execute on those. So we have a plan, and we're always looking at ways to try to reduce that and contain costs.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate that. I have one final question. On page 197, can someone explain the 26,259% increase in supplies? Wow, eyeballs bulging.
Oh.
What is that?
Well, so when you came in tonight, we had replacement pages Because when we, oh, is it? Okay. Oh, it's, oh, that, so that is the correct number, okay.
So it's
Okay.
not one of the replacements?
Okay, okay, yeah, so we have, in district-wide, we have a fund, set aside resources to provide for things that happen, can happen during the year, to provide flexibility within the budget, things that can, you know, not turn out the way we estimated, or things that happen where the administration and/or the board could decide to make an investment. So we have to have some resources identified. It's put in supplies and not spent out of supplies. It's just a place where it's residing until it gets redirected, if that hopefully makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of confusing to see
Yeah.
it presented in this manner in the book. 'Cause it
Yeah, yeah.
implies something else.
Well, it's a struggle of, you know, where do you, it's kind of contingency funds. Where do we put contingency funds? I have tried to, we previously had kind of contingencies kind of all over the place, and I've tried to narrow that down to just a few places, right? So we don't have multiple little pots here and there. And so you're going to see that impact in this year when we're kind of pulling it all together in one spot. So.
Okay, so
Yeah.
is there a way in the future that we can see that these are contingencies then, marked somehow in the budget?
Well, I think the challenge is how do you reflect it in the budget? And obviously we need to do a better job. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Simmons?
I almost want an example so I can follow that, but thank you. That's interesting. Great question. Page 203, looking at ARP, I think, that touches on, under the capacity for student success, it touches on one of my earlier questions around the K through 2, what we were doing there. And I see that's mostly focused on instruction or, you know, building capacity, what have you. Then it made me think about like the Office of Parent Engagement or something like that. Like beyond bringing these pieces together, first of all, what would be the testing tool? I'm assuming iReady would be how we would test to see if the science of reading was working. Is that the assessment that we would want to hear, right?
Sir, great question again, Commissioner Simmons. So within the science of reading or the letters curriculum, or excuse me, the letters program or structures, there's actually a past test that could be provided by teachers to actually determine where it is that, where the gaps may lie in terms of phonics, phonemic awareness, decoding, so on and so forth with our students. But we do have the iReady program that, you know, is our benchmarker across the district to determine if it's successful or not.
Okay, thank you. And so then I guess where I was going with the Office of Parent Engagement, and I don't even know if that's the right space, so you guys can correct me, but my whole point is bridging the gap between home and school, you know, because oftentimes we're thinking education in the brick and mortar building, but how are we bridging that? And is there an opportunity to reimagine that or pour some resources into a space where parents can have those resources to enhance their child's reading while they're at home as well? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And at last month's business meeting, I did share those two resources, Amira and Paper, that are at-home resources that kids could use, right? All of these platforms to some level can be used at home, I think you just hit a good point, is how do we connect with Parent University and Office of Parent Engagement to do
Right.
some parent education around how they can interpret, look at, and see this
Right,
stuff.
not just like a link, but
Yep.
actually bridge that capacity like we're doing with our educators. So I was just.
Absolutely. So I've had some conversation, and, Deputy Turner could talk with the Office of Parent Engagement about what we could offer during, what we could offer during the, during OPE, Parent University courses, so that we could have an educational learning part of that as well.
Right, thank you for that. That's not me? Right, okay. Then I was looking, and I was so excited on page 204, under school redesign program diversification, to see the field trips for specialized schools and model programs, and I get that the expeditionary learning, the IB programs were some examples, Montessori. So I'm going to make an assumption, correct me again, but would the other field trips be like schools are responsible for their own field trips through the budget? Because I know we were providing some form of flexibility with schools to make decisions. Will they have dollars available to do field trips?
Yeah, so schools do get allocations of field trip funds that they could use. This is in the Department of Teaching and Learning as well, so the schools have their funds, and then if they wanted to use some of their ARP funding, their American Rescue Plan funding, that may be in each of the schools sections in here as well. But this is more about overall budget for teaching and learning to support that.
Gotcha.
as well.
Okay, thank you. I think I have one last question. That's on page 205, special education. And so, again, I do see the increasing pay because teachers need to, learn and, forgive me, I'm trying to form my question, but basically build capacity again around evaluations for students and so on. Is there a tool or is there any type of investment around compliance and measurement? Like, how are we going to measure compliance as we're building capacity?
So I'm going to ask Des, our Chief of Special Ed, to come up, but we are looking and transitioning to a new frontline product that could help us with managing some of this data, but I'll let Des speak.
And as she's approaching, thank you, hello, good evening. Is that the frontline product that you're mentioning, is that something that the budget is allocating for? Or?
Yep, it's in the budget. Yeah, it's in the budget.
So I heard a couple of things in. So service management is the new system that we're using to track the delivery of related services for our students. And it also helps us with all the pieces that need to make it a billable service through Medicaid. But I also heard you say something about transition plan. So was that one of the questions with transition? Or was it was all about?
I think it was around compliance. So I see that we're building capacity, and thank you for sharing that tool, compliance.
Yeah, well, compliance, every school has a compliance log, and all IEPs are looked at, and that data is collected, and the schools, every student has a compliance line for the school, and it says, when is that meeting due? Do they have a reevaluation? Is this an initial? And then there's timelines that we set. It is then the responsibility for the associate director to make sure they meet those timelines, along with the directors monitoring the associate directors to ensure that we have compliant documents, compliant timelines. So we're getting there. It's a process that we've built over the last couple of years, and it's really starting to work. We're starting to see the impact because we're seeing an increase in timeliness of meetings and all of those pieces.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. I'm actually going to ask Commissioner Powell to see if she has any questions.
I do, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so this question is oriented around capacity, FMP, and CIP related. Earlier tonight, there was discussion about one of the charter schools closing and those children, in all likelihood, coming back to us. And I'm sure at this precise stage, we have the capacity to absorb them. But my understanding of the charter school law is that in the event that charter schools close, we can't turn students away. But at the same time, the state is watching us closely under our FMP to make sure that we don't have excess capacity. Has the state established a threshold of how much capacity we should be holding in reserve in the event that one or more than one, or through some catastrophe, all of the charter schools should choose to close all at once? Has the state set a capacity, a contingency capacity level that we should be maintaining? And if so, how close to that are we right now? And if not, is this something we should be lobbying for?
So I don't know of a set capacity. I would have to look a little bit further, but I don't believe there is one. I do believe that whatever we decide to do with open seats, we just need to make sure during FMP planning that we have strong justification as to why we're leaving those seats available. So we need to make sure that if we're going to leave X amount of seats at a school or at several schools, that we're clearly articulating why we're doing it, and then also some of our strategies to potentially get some of those charter school students back. That's the approach that I've been looking at and taking, and I think that's the approach we've looked at on FMP planning and the information in our plan. But I don't know of any set SCD requirement, but I'll ask Chief Schmidt, who's been doing FMP longer than I have, if he knows anything else.
Good evening, Commissioner Powell. I think the one thing I would add is on page 6 of our capital improvement program, it gives our internal guidelines. We look at between 85 and 90% as a target number for us in terms of building utilization. It allows us to create some flexibility for some internal initiatives and that type of thing academically, but the state does not provide any baseline or guidance around children returning from charter schools or a district set aside in that regard. And with 7,800 students, we'd be talking about setting aside a significant number of buildings if they all were to close at once. So there's no, what they will do is they will, in the aid calculation, they will take into account the available seats that if you fall under that 85 to 80%, it'll be held, and it won't give your aid ratio nearly what you want to have in terms of renovations.
Thank you. You've definitely captured the spirit of my question. So to respond to Dr. Peluso, the fact that, and I believed it to be true that the state does not identify a contingency capacity. So I wonder if it is something that we should be adding to our legislative agenda. But the scenario I was envisioning for like wholesale catastrophe would be if in some future date the state decides it's not going to require reimbursement to charter schools sufficient to let them operate. It's in other words, the state's own funding sabotaging them. Another element of that charter school legislation is that they have the ability to occupy space with under rules that we would not be allowed to utilize. So if a charter school were to close and we didn't have the capacity in our own facilities, we wouldn't necessarily, without some waiver from the state, be able to simply take over a charter school's lease or lease the building from them in order to continue to provide seats for students. Is that correct?
In essence, yes, you are correct. I think it would not necessarily be a plug and play where we would just pick up a lease and continue with the facility as it's currently being utilized by a charter school. Every facility is obviously a little bit different, but most of the charters in our area would be using buildings that would be well below our standard, especially after school modernization.
Thank you. I thought since discussion of charter school students coming back to us, it was an important aspect of our budget conversation that the public needed to be aware of, but it is only tangential to our budget deliberation. So I would only ask that we flesh out a specific ask of the state for our legislative agenda. And I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, page 205, priority 2. I'm trying to understand this 150,000 going for school resource officer at East. That's one person. That's 150,000. That is a lot of money, and I just don't understand it. Could I get some explanation on this?
So, yes,
Dr. Spence, I believe you are on Zoom representing East tonight, so this question would go to you on behalf of East High School.
Thank you. Pardon me. I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat that?
Yes, hold on.
Page 205, priority 2, second paragraph, $150,000 for school resource officer, creating a culture of support for social emotional learning. I just need some explanation about this, because I don't see it nowhere else in this budget.
Okay, first of all, thank you for putting it on the screen, because I don't have that book with me. But yes,
I can answer that question. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Spence. Commissioner Adams, that particular expense was originally earmarked last year when we were trying to secure a contract with the RPD to support the safety of the building. When we had a bunch of problems last year, we kind of rolled that fund, that dollar amount over in case things spike to start the school year as well. It should also be noted that the RPD did not have enough police officers to even fulfill that request, and that's why the funding was never utilized. So it was a earmarked amount, it's projected amount for that service based on the officer and the overtime, but that contract may or may not be utilized depending on how things begin next school year.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Nelms. I just also have a question, and it's related to East, but I think it's a question for both superintendents. I just want to understand what funding formula was used to distribute ARP dollars, the American Rescue Plan dollars, to East High School, which is one high school, in comparison to how dollars were allocated through ARP for all of our other high schools. Because I do see a number of initiatives here through the ARP dollars, and granted that, yes, this is for the 23-24 proposed budget, but we are in the we're in that year now to talk about. So if there was changes in this draft for ARP, then we would need to see those changes for the budget book, and they should be reflective of how we're spending or proposing to spend in next year's budget. But what funding formula was used? Because I don't think this is no secret to anybody who's going to hear me say this, but I've always said there is a strong inequity in how one high school, being East, is funded in comparison to other high schools. And I understand that there is a partnership and an EPO, and I get all those things, but it did create inequities in other high schools who historically right now are serving more students and struggling because they have significantly less resources. So for me, when I was going through and seeing how much East was allocated, I needed to understand what the funding formula was used for other high schools. I know there's a number of funding and initiatives under teaching and learning that will then get redistributed back to high schools, but I would like to see what formula was used and how much exactly each of our high schools got in comparison to East High School and based on their budget line for this year and moving into the next budget year. And either superintendent can start, yeah.
I can take that one to start, and Dr. Fusco can continue. I think your last statement is best describes what happened. There are allocations for the district that went to other departments that will be redistributed. For ours goes directly to East, and the formula that's used for all high schools is the exact same formula. So that formula came from the state. They let us know how much we get as a school in that allocation, and we use those funding. So we didn't advocate for any additional funding. We didn't do anything like that. There are some areas where we did try to partner with the previous administration and this administration, and there's some shared resources. But by and large, the formula is the same across schools. The district has a larger bucket, obviously, and they were able to redistribute some of that to some of the departments centrally to be deployed to schools or through curriculum, et cetera. And that's the biggest difference. But just to be clear, East did not advocate or get any additional funds. It's the same formula that was used. And we have been partnering with the district to see how we can stretch those resources to ensure that all schools get those benefits. One example of that is, you might recall last summer, we had the professional learning week that where districts were to come together, schools were to come together and talk about effective teaching and learning and SEL support, restorative practices. And that was not under Dr. Bluso. Unfortunately, district made the decision back then not to engage. But as we said earlier, we're committed to doing some more collaborative work this summer by stretching those art dollars. And under Stephen Moore and Demario Strickland, we've already had some conversations on how to collaborate and do some of that work for their professional development this week for the RCSD. So those funds, just in short, those funds, there's no extra funds, same funding formula. Is how they're distributed in the district might look a little different because they do some things centrally and then take it back out to schools.
All right, I just want to add before Dr. Peluso also responds. One, I would like to see that funding formula that was used side-by-side comparison to the number of students and staff for all of our high schools, including East, as part of our budget. And I know that we're going to be voting next week, but I do still think it's going to be important that we document and reflect that as a separate piece, if you will, for ARP. I also just want to point out on record that East is already disproportionately budgeted to have more money in general than other high schools because of the East EPO as itself. And so there's already an inequitable funding baseline, if you will, in my opinion, and I've always said this since I've joined the board, that when I look at a school like Edison, who has significantly larger number of students, but doesn't have the same level of resources, then there's an inequity there. So I just want to point that out, that we still struggled, and it's not just my opinion, these are the numbers too, that I need to understand, again, what the funding formula looks like for all of the high schools in comparison. So right now, I cannot see that because it could be under teaching and learning that they got $200,000, but then really what it turns out to is that one high school got 10,000 and another one got 15. So I do need to see the formula and what each high school received, and what their student population and staffing population looks like in a matrix form, so that it can be added to the front page of this for ARP, and that we also have that reflected on our website so that anybody can pull it up and see how ARP was distributed by high schools per dollars. And I'll let you respond now. Thank you.
Yep. Nope. So I'll just give a brief overview of the allocation. So when the funding was first allocated, buckets were split, and there was a determined amount for schools. Each school had their funding was based on their enrollment and their accountability status. Very similar to, if you remember at our last budget cycle, we went through the total allocation per pupil, the TAPU spending. It's very similar. So every school got $877.20 for every student they had. They also then received an additional $250 for students with disabilities. So whatever, if they had 100 kids, they get $877 for each of those kids. But then if 20 of those were students with disabilities, they got an additional $250 for each of those students with disability. And then they also received an additional $179 for L learners as well. So that's how the formula, their calculation was done. Then on top of that, if you were a receivership school, you had $175,000 additional add on that total. If you were $100,000 for a CSI school, if you were a CSI school non-receivership, you received $100,000, and if you were a targeted TSI school, you received $37,500. So that was the formula for how it was. What ended up happening was, and I think this is where the East and District thing is a little different. East got the same formula on that as well. We have a spend down worry with ARP. East has a small pocket of that money. We have a large pocket of that money here in District, and we need to make sure that money is being spent down. So if a school decided that they wanted to put in one FTE in each of those years for year 1, year 2, and year 3 of ARP, and year 1 and year 2, they didn't spend that money because they couldn't find someone, year 3, we're at risk if they say, well, we're going to roll that and put 3 FTEs into this year. So we said, nope, we're not going to do that. So we took the budget by year, and we've taken money that's not used by year. With East, because East is a separate, they've kept their money. I haven't taken any money back from East because that's Dr. Nelms and his team and their money to decide. So that's the one slight difference, I would say, is that we're grabbing money back just to make sure that we get a spend down on this money, because if we don't, that's a problem. We want to make sure we have so many lines that we have to code for this coming. This grant ends September, a year from this September, and we have to recode every single line to offset any general fund cost if we don't spend that money. And if we don't do that, then we lose that money. So that's kind of where we are. So that's what our grants department does, but I could give you I know that's a long-winded answer, but I could definitely give you those numbers I just shared today and the overall bid budgets that schools got for ARP.
I think that would be helpful too for the community to kind of see what the formula was used for high schools and how they were funded. I guess my only then follow-up question back to Dr. Nelms is, what's your plan for the spend down? Because for the example he just used, let's say you had an FTE, it wasn't filled. How are you then communicating back to this board what your plans are for ARP and what was spent or not spent and your spend down plan?
Well, one is we didn't allocate any funding to staffing for ARP because we knew that the money would be going away, and I didn't want to create a structure that we could sustain over time. So a lot of our supports has been for professional development, for SEL support, and some of those structures, so we can build internal capacity within our team, so not to rely on an outside resource. I used the word stretch earlier. I probably should have been more clear, but for some of our resources, we're trying to open it up to other schools. So for example, last summer for professional learning, in our ARP funding, we were paying teachers throughout the district, administrators who are 10 months, to be able to come in and collaborate around curricular units and modes of instruction. That's another way to fund it, is to build internal capacity. And we're so through collaborative efforts with the district, we're spending down, but we have not dedicated our funding to staff necessarily. It's been through programs and services, because we didn't think we could maintain that. So in the instance that we can't spend down, we'll work with the district to see how we can collaborate to do so. But we did not allocate funding to staffing because we knew that it would create some type of fiscal cliff in the end, and that's the exact same plan that Dr. Caluso is using right now to make sure we're not in a bind at the end of this school year.
Dr. Nelms, I know you just said that twice, but I just want to point out that on page 202, Just to give you an example, there is one FTE listed, and that is for East. One FTE special education teacher to oversee work-based learning opportunities, and that is budgeted for $80,000. But there are other indications in here that do specifically say FTE attached to it. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, I'm aware. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm on Zoom, so there's a delay. If I cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to point that out because as you're saying that when someone outside is reading this, it's going to look like you did allocate funding for FTE because that's how it's listed here, unless you're saying that you took an internal person already. I just don't understand why it would be worded that way. Then why wouldn't it have been worded that we're just going to restructure a area versus moving an FTE or putting an FTE? Because the district side also lists an FTE. But I'll give you an example. On 203, you say 1 FTE for a work-based learning coordinator to support the expansion of the work-based learning program, 1 FTE work-based learning co-op coordinator. So I just want to point out that in this art budget, there are a number of East EPO's budget lines listed with FTEs attached to them. Are all those positions filled?
Yeah, so typically we can go into the weeds of the budget. So there's also a community school coordinator also within our fund. That's a 1-year position, and it was advertised as a 1-year position. So at the end of this year, that goes away. The co-op position, we took a teacher who was already in. We backfilled that position, not with a person. We worked the master schedule to create this work-based learning because part of the issues post-COVID where the students were leaving high school and not getting jobs or not getting to college. We wanted to make sure we bridged that gap. So that was a 2-year intervention that we'll monitor to see if we can afford to sustain that within our budget moving forward. We have the funding to do so at this point. And so that's all been strategic in nature. So if someone reads that particular line item, I want to be clear that we have not funded any positions that we anticipate keeping beyond next year unless we can absorb it within our budget. And when I mean within our budget, that won't exceed what our budget allocations from the district or the state are. So we have our funds and our positions within our budget. There are some that we move and let ARP pay for those positions, which was our intent. And then we have thought about those positions. It's only about 2 or 3 within the budget on a 3-year cycle. Some have been advertised to just be 2 years, and the people employed know that, or just 1 year. In this particular position, if the co-op position proves to be effective, when we're getting more kids employed and more kids in the college, then we may be able to absorb that position moving forward. But that particular individual in that role knows that at the end of the ARP funding, that position goes away unless we can fund it within our budget. So there are no individuals who have been hired or any positions that have been created that expect to be there after this year unless we rework our budget within our budget to prioritize it.
Thank you, Dr. Nelms. President Elliott, any questions related to ARP, the capital improvement project, or district-wide section?
Sure. Thank you, Vice President. With regard to the section on, let me just go to the staffing positions first. And I'm looking at page 280. I mean salaries, and this one is over 162,000. One of the things I had advocated for years ago, not on this board, but that we had the all of the salaries listed in the book, and I think that what may have happened is that when we were looking at reducing the size of the book, that part may have been eliminated. But I do think that we need to have, if we're going to not have all of the salaries listed in the budget book, that we at least have those salaries that are 100,000 or over in the budget book. So I will ask that for consideration, that we include salaries at least 100,000. that are to be included in the book. And then just in terms of the ARP funding, and when is the report due to the feds on terms of how we spent it, just the whole reporting and evaluation process? When is that report due? And when is it available for the board and the public to see?
So we are providing quarterly updates on ARP and what the spend down is, right? You know, so our objective is to spend this down as much as we possibly can, right? We don't want to offset general funds if we don't have to. So we're providing quarterly updates as we go through. I think currently, as of March 31st, don't quote me, I think we were at 118 million or so left there. We're going to continue to spend down on, and that's without staff encumbered positions that are going forward for March and then into next year. So we're constantly looking at what is not being spent, trying to be cognizant of people's plans to spend, and then what we could begin to take back so that we can allocate funding to initiatives, programs, projects, so that we spend this down as much as possible. Our plan right now is to start to recode this and get this in place by, October of November of next year, so that we could start to alleviate some of those expenses. Because, like I said, extremely labor intensive, and I believe it's September 30th is the cutoff date on the grant, and then from there we would have a period of time of 30 days to submit to state ed or feds.
So what have been, and how are we going to report some of the positive things, positive outcomes that have occurred as a result of having this funding?
Great question. I think you're seeing some of it in like our HBCU trips, right? That's all that's coming from this. So we're seeing positive experiences from there. Some of the work we're doing in building some of the schools in terms of, their modular classrooms and what they see in terms of opportunities that kids have for enrichment. That's where, if you look through a lot of the ARP, you'll see some of those expenses, and you'll see people moving to those versus people, like Dr. Nelms had said, right, into some resources. So in hopes that you see that, we also have some program evaluation that we're going to do on a lot of the initiatives we've had to say, here's how some of these new programs, new initiatives, this is what our program evaluation team has come up with. Here's what Gibson has come up with. Here's the value of it, and do we want to include this in the budget moving forward? And then what falls off from the budget because that's coming in. So those are some of the things we'll start to see. So from the program evaluation from Gibson, our program evaluation team has already provided us a lot of data where you'll be able to see the good things that happen, and then also just from highlights of kids' experiences as well.
So just to look at state exams, could we associate any of the ARP funding to the increase or improvement on our state exams?
That's a great question, and I would hope so, right? And I would say that we went through a couple of years of exemptions when this money was there, right? So this is our first real year of where we're going to be able to see how students perform versus what types of supports we have. So that's where we could, when we do the evaluation, we'll be doing evaluation of intervention, some of those other resources to see what the impact is on that.
And just one other question. I think this may have been in revenue, but in terms of the $5 million gap, and when I looked at the benefits section, typically when we have a gap, it's always related to legacy costs. But I saw that even in benefits, for example, that cost exceeded $5 million. So what was the reason for the $5 million shortfall?
So I think the $5 million was to start to look at our fund balance and how we could use fund balance in a way to support maybe some projects and some one-time occurring costs that come across the year. and not build that into the budget per se, right? You know, to have it's there, but it's also a little it's more transparent to say this is how this money is going to be put aside and used for. If we don't have $5 million of projects or $5 million of recurring costs, it won't be used. The legacy costs that you're referring to are usually substantial every single year. I just want to say that we had $48 million of increased foundation aid this year to make us fully whole based on some of the foundation aid that we currently were owed. We won't have that next year. So we were fortunate enough to absorb that into this year's budget, which will make next year's even more a little bit more difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Elliott. I know our parent rep, Diveth, has been waiting. She has one final question.
Good evening again. Annalie going to help me with this one, so I'm going to make it in Spanish. En caso de algún evento natural, por ejemplo, como pasó con el huracán María, cuando yo llegué aquí con mis hijos, ¿el distrito tiene un plan para estos casos en caso de alguna eventualidad para recibir estas familias o estudiantes y tiene la capacidad financiera para recibirlos?
If there is a natural event such as Hurricane Maria, like when I arrived with my kids, does the district have a plan in this case or any case to receive families and students? Do we have the financial capacity to receive them?
So very, very good question. And I will say that we're healthy as a district, right? Our fund balance is right now at $162 million. We will have an increase of fund balance again going into next year based on some operational cost savings as well as those cursor savings that we've talked about. So we'll have some savings again for next year. And then the following year, we will have additional money from savings in ARP. So to answer your question, we'll be healthy enough as a board and as a community to say we need to make a change and make an adjustment and use fund balance to do that, right? We historically have not been in that position where we've been able to make those types of changes quickly. That way we don't have to budget for those emergencies. We do have that balance for if we get to that situation.
I just want to add, though, as someone who worked on the community end to do the multi-resource center that we did with Ibero, the Red Cross, the district, Rochester Regional Health, and a number of other providers, including even the Rochester Housing Authority, that there's already that infrastructure, so God forbid there was another natural disaster, we would be joining forces again as a community to address the families and their needs as they come here, because it is more complicated than just the enrollment in school, right? It's the housing piece. Is lots of folks who came with medical issues who needed to have insurance, but even beyond the insurance, be able to pay for insurance, because we can get someone registered for insurance. It still takes 30 days for it to kick in. So that's where the Red Cross came in and paid for medications to bridge. So I can say that during that natural disaster, all of the agencies that came together worked quickly around the bureaucracy that typically exists or the red tape to get access to services. And the district was one of those partners, and they were at every single multi-resource center event that we held, enrolling kids on the spot and providing that. So in the event of a natural disaster, I think we have all learned, even through COVID, that we can act much faster than we typically act on a day-to-day. But I will say that we've had the experience of coming together and adapting policies and procedures to meet the emergency needs. And they were good partners. And if they weren't, I would call them out right now about that. I just want to put that out there. What I will say, that even before I had joined the board, Hurricane Maria was happening, like it happened, and I was observing the board create a bilingual academy. And a lot of folks here have been, in this community, especially Latino families, have been advocating for that for years, and it was not done well. And that is something I would not support, because we only have one certified teacher in that space. We pulled folks from places like Cuba and Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico who were educated to do other things, and we just threw them into to teach in an education system that they had no experience in, which is vastly different from the way that public education rolls out in Puerto Rico. It's a completely different system. So I just want to put that out there that, you know, even now with the experience under me, I would be looking at the district accepting those students into already well-established schools and bilingual and duolingual programs versus creating something and then not doing it well, because that is a disservice to families when we do that. So I just wanted to put that out there. That was, I don't want to relive that, but thank you. Commissioner Patterson, do you have any final questions? I know we've gone around and.
Yes, yes, thank you. Let's see. You know, first and foremost, you know, I want to say some positive things and then ask the questions that are more in depth. So starting off with some of the positive things, I'm really happy to see in regards to social and emotional learning and resources and support that the increase in psychologists and social workers and counselors, you know, in this budget, even though we'd like to see even more, but I'm happy to see those on page. I'm referring to page 205, improving learning for students with disabilities, the supporting equity, inclusion, and social emotional learning. You have at the bottom of that 16, I think it is, FTEs, counselors to provide additional support, additional social and emotional support for students. I see on page 206 and supporting North Star and responding to the unique needs of students with disabilities. Another social worker and counselor there. Priority 3, leadership and instructional capacity. Employment contracts for psychology interns to establish an employment pipeline. And the recruitment and retention incentives for high-need staff. So those are some of the areas that you get kudos for. I think it's we're doing a really good job there, and I like in this budget. Let's see. Community collaboration, digital funds. Some of the questions that I do have. Let's go to page 207. Increasing staff and educator effectiveness. You know, with the continued reduction in student enrollment, it looks like we're adding a few positions here, and correct me if I'm wrong. And if you could just respond to that with, again, the reduction while we're adding, you know, these positions. Over on page 208, it's under community schools implementation. We're hiring, it looks like 16 community school site coordinators. If you could explain what that is. Just some of the questions that I have. Partnering with communities, looks like we're creating another position for a senior communications assistant and 2 digital media, social media coordinators. Over on page 210, it lists underneath achieving and maintaining digital equity. We're hiring, if I'm correct, 5 help desk assistants to support families, students, and staff in IT needs. Again, not that I'm not for supporting families and students and staff, I am, definitely. But could you explain why we need like 5, you know, individuals in that area? Again, I ask this only because for me it's very important with the ARP funds ending in 2024, how we're going to continue to pay for these people. So if we have a plan for it, that's fine, but if we don't, and we're still hiring people and creating these positions, if you could explain to me these positions and why they should be in this budget, I'd appreciate it.
So I'm going to answer your question in a couple of parts here, right? This is the funding for the position. So it could have been hired 2 years ago, and this is now in year 3 of that employee, right? So this is funded for another year. So we may have had this resource for 3 years at this point. All of our grant-funded employees recognize and they know that this was under the funding of ARP. And I think your larger question comes into what we just talked about with program evaluation and making some decisions on what we used the money for that was good that needs to go into our budget. Not all of these are going to go in there. I want to draw your attention to page 224. On the bottom of the page there, you've pointed out some singleton of staff ads. There's 227.23 total FTEs that are in ARP.
I didn't catch that last statement. You said singleton of something?
You pointed out singleton ads, like the 16
Okay.
here, right? But what I'm trying to show here is that there's 227.23 of those ads in ARP. Right, so there's a lot of positions that are going to have to be evaluated, and we're going to have to make some decisions on what we keep and what we let go.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever we decide to keep has larger impacts on other budget items, right? Like I just said, we had a $48 million increase of foundation aid this year that we don't anticipate next year. We have this ARP money that is gone at the end of next year. So we have some decisions that we have to make in terms of what is and what stays. That being said, it doesn't mean these positions now are not helpful to our district and our students, right? So we're going to maximize this resource and utilize it while we can, make some evaluations as we move forward for 24-25. Hence why I've said throughout this is this 23-24 budget, we've been fruitful with money and very lucky. 24-25 isn't going to be as easy as it is what we've experienced in terms of increased funding and how we've been able to use ARP and other things to make sure we have a whole balanced budget. Next year, we won't have that ability.
Okay, thank you.
And if there's something specific about certain things, like I could have our Deputy Superintendent Turner talk about the community schools one, because that is one that's we're taking very seriously to kind of build in terms of a community schools model.
Thank you, Superintendent. So yes, we were able to put 16 community site coordinators position in ARP funding. So we are working with Dr. Jallo to reimagine our community schools to make sure that we're tightly aligned with the community school model. So they're doing really great, meaningful work in supporting the students, the staff, and the community in those community schools. So that's been really advantageous for us to be able to make sure that our schools are really following the community school model and that the community is benefiting from that. And you can see also, as you highlighted, a lot of social emotional supports in the schools. We were able to leverage ARP funding also for those for addressing chronic absenteeism, parent engagement, and many useful things that we desperately needed to do.
Okay, thank you. And one more thing, point I'd like to make is that I neglected to make the first time is relative to obviously school safety, and as my colleagues are also concerned, just as concerned as I am relative to school safety. So when it comes to the SSOs, the Recruitment and Retention Initiative, that was nice to see that piece in there too, that you're also offering them, I don't know if I should say this, but I guess I'm not. I'm going to stay away from that. But I'll let you, if you would, Mr. Superintendent, could you talk relative to any ARP funds that you're going to utilize, to increase anything dealing with school safety or SSOs?
So I have, so two things here. So we did approve $7 million out of fund balance last board meeting for safety and security. And part of that had to do with, I would have loved to use ARP on that, but there's an extensive process, especially when we're doing designs at NYSED, New York State Education Department, that we have to seek to get approval. And we would have never been able to use the ARP funding to do that because it would have been too long through the approval process for the spend down. So eventually, like I said, some of these costs will be offset and will come back to fund balance, but that's why we established the $7 million right then. And Chief Operating Officer and his team are starting to do a design plan of what that $7 million is to provide the board an outline how it's going to look and where that $7 million come. I have put some money aside in ARP. And have asked to put some money in ARP to look at some pay and the pay of our school safety officers, right? To make sure that what we do with our school safety officers, that we make that appropriate and right.
And thank you for saying that. That's the piece I really know should I speak on.
But, that I will say, I'm not going to share what amount or where it is, but I also know whatever it comes to, because I've been in contact with the union and we've had some conversation. Whatever the decision is, there will be, as much as I'll be able to absorb it in ARP this year, will be one of those financial, it will impact our finances for next year, right? So if, whatever money that we decide to agree on that's going to have an impact moving forward is going to have an impact on the overall budget after that, right? So there's always cost associated with this. Once again, benefit of using ARP funds to have some of those conversations with. But the other part of this is that there's some long-term costs, legacy costs that will come from this, that we'll have to know that will impact other areas of our spending, right? And that's going to make this money, these positions, ARP gone, all of our budget process a little bit more difficult because some hard decisions are going to have to be made around what we're going to spend on and what we're going to value. And I'm hoping that with our strategic plan process, we'll be able to center ourselves to say, this is what we've agreed on as important values to this district and what we're going to be spending, so that makes some of the decision-making easier for myself and us as a board moving forward.
All right, and last but not least, I would hope that, because there's been some question relative to community collaboration and whether or not that's occurring, but I would hope in, whatever decisions we're making that, especially when it concerns schools and safety, that you would have collaboration with our community on that.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think we're going to be talking with especially our school community, right? What are our SSOs saying as well? What are our employees saying? What are our students saying? What are our families saying are important? Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, or Vice President.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. And I just want to also point out just two things. One, participatory budgeting. The tool is still online and still open as we develop the next budget book for ease of clarity. But the tool is also meant to really engage the community in this budget process in a different way. And so right now we're using it to get feedback on the budget book. However, the goal is next year we align our actual budget into that participatory budgeting tool. And I do think other districts have utilized it to make difficult decisions as well, and we can align it that way too, to kind of see these are the decisions that the board has to make in the administration. Where does the community lie on some of these decisions? Option A, B, or C. And so that's how I envision that we'll utilize that tool moving forward. But I do want to point out as we wrap up here that Dr. Peluso has mentioned this multiple times, even our state monitor. I know I have said it multiple times, and President Elliott, that really next year's budget, we really have to start looking at it come July 1. So this budget, if it passes, but July 1, we really have to start having budget conversations about next year's budget way in advance. And so one of the things I will be looking to do to help the administration is move our board priorities for next year's budget all the way up to August, so that those priorities are laid out up front for the administration around things that we absolutely do not want you to touch, and that way that'll help give them some greater direction. But I have to stress that we as board members and as a body and as a unit have to stay the course. I don't want to have board budget priorities that we give them in August and then they built an entire budget based on those priorities, and then we come back to deliberations and we're like, no, we want this to be a priority, because then that defeats the whole purpose of trying to give that information out to them way in advance so that they can. So it is going to require the administration to do things different, but it is going to require us as a board to make some tough decisions and sort of stick with them so that we then don't end up messing up the budget when we're close to the end of the budget deliberations next year. And I'll remind us all again of this in August, but I do want to go back to the fact that this is Commissioner Powell's last budget deliberations, and I was not sure if she wanted to give some words tonight, or if she wants to have some time to close us out next week at the budget vote. And Commissioner Powell, I'll defer to you. I know that you're off camera today, and I don't know if you want to give some parting words tonight or for the budget process and budget deliberations, and tonight or next week.
Well, thank you for the window, the opportunity. I have an observation and kind of a recommendation, and it has to do, Commissioner LeBron, you probably opened the meeting by announcing that the state has approved its school budget, or its budget for schools. And the New York State School Board Association put out a press release, touting the fact that the promise of the 2007 Contract for Excellence has finally been fully funded. The Contract for Excellence promised full funding in 4 years. It has taken 16 years. And that full funding has not come with an inflation adjustment. So we're going to have to go right back to the funding formula table and ask for inflation-adjusted dollars going forward. One of the arguments that the state made for a 4-year phase-in, they weren't prepared to admit that they didn't have the money to fully fund schools, high-needs schools all at once. They basically told the public that if they gave us everything they owed us, and I'll use that phrase and that emphasis as I did, if they gave us everything that was owed to us in a fair funding formula, we wouldn't even know how to spend it wisely. And I would argue that everything that we've seen for the last 2 years with ARP and SRSA dollars, under the right leadership, and again, I'll emphasize the words and the emphasis on those words, with the right leadership, we can make some really impactful decisions that are entirely focused on the needs of our children, the socioeconomic emphasis, the safety emphasis, and the core mission of improving teaching and learning. But in addition to the fact that there's no cost of living adjustment over those 16 years, there's another sort of tail left over from the 2007 legislation. If I'm not mistaken, we still have to file a report for 25% of every additional dollar from that formula aid and what it was spent on. And in theory, we're not allowed to use it for anything that we were already doing, that it had to be new spending on new program. That language, I believe, is still in state law as part of the contract for excellence. And I believe we're still required to hold contract for excellence public hearings. And Mr. Superintendent, tell me if I'm wrong about that. That's definitely legislation that's got to be erased from the books. And needs to be part of our legislative agenda. So my question is, when is the contract for excellence hearing scheduled for, or has it already occurred and I hadn't noticed it? We at least need to follow the letter of the law, even when the state does not have that expectation of us.
Agreed with your sentiments on contracts for excellence, right? We do not have the seminar hearing scheduled. We will have that scheduled in time. And I'm not positive, but I think that may sunset this year. I'm not 100% positive, but I'll look into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to President Elliott to close this out for the night. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President. I just wanted to say this is probably the first budget deliberation that I have not been frustrated. I mean, we have left in a decent time. We haven't been here all night. The process really has been smooth. There's been some poignant questions that have been asked by my colleagues. And it's just been, it's been a whole different approach to our budget process, and not any fighting over it, and you know, all of what we saw last, well, I'll scratch that. You know, I mean, it's just, but it goes back even, you know, in my tenure on this board, that this has really been an amazing process, and I thank my colleagues, but in particular, I want to thank the Vice President that really has been on top of this, and this has just been the kind of process that we should have been doing all along, but it takes the right people. And so I thank my colleagues for working together on this, and again, asking the kind of poignant questions that need to be asked. And and I know that the Vice President will do this on Tuesday, but thanking all of the budget staff as well. I was saying to the superintendent earlier today that, you know, it looks calm on the surface, but they probably have those little duck feet under the water, you know, that they're just, you know, moving, you know, I mean, the nervousness of it. And so, but I just want to thank Chief Farr and his staff, and thank the superintendent for this process, and even in response to the questions that have been, you've answered them intelligently, and we appreciate that. And just want to thank everyone. I'm telling you, this has just been, it's been a whole different process. And again, I think it speaks to our board, I think it speaks to the staff, and I just want to again thank the Vice President for leading us in this. And with that, I'll say good night. And I think Commissioner all right. So Commissioner Patterson? Yep.
Just wanted to say one thing, if I may, relative to tomorrow at 10:30, the National Day of Prayer. All right, so tomorrow at 10:30 at the mayor's, our city hall, we'll be assembling there, and at 6:00 p.m. we'll also be assembling, if you can't make it, at the Rochester Community Sports event.
Commissioner Malloy?
So if I can get everyone to turn to page, I'm just kidding.
Say good night, Commissioner Malloy. Good night, everybody. Thank you.